Jane Nelson, my mentor from Positive Discipline, used to always say, still says it, that education, the root word is educare, to draw forth. So that was the big thing with me, was using language or using questioning or using a coaching style that was drawing out of them, like you were saying earlier, that ability to solve problems versus always just giving the answers.
Hello, and welcome back to You Need a Counselor podcast. My name is Dr. Julie Johnson, and welcome to another episode.
And I'm Chrissa Hunt. I am the Vice President in charge of our company, Heart and Solutions, and I'm in charge of the BHIS department, which stands for Behavioral Health Intervention Services. And this is our podcast, You Need a Counselor. So we are designed for people curious about counseling, but have barriers keeping them from experiencing the benefits of counseling. Our mission is to share stories about counseling, good, bad, and indifferent, and spread the message that everyone can benefit from mental health and behavioral health counseling services.
So we've got a guest today who is a kind of mixed sports psychology with early childhood development. He's got a master's in sports psychology, but also one in early childhood development, which I think is such a cool mix of different disciplines to be able to create this very, very unique type of coaching experience that he can provide for sports teams, for individuals, for children, for adults. We're very, very excited to have him here. So Coach Reed Maltbie is here with us today. Welcome, Coach Reed.
Thank you for having me on. I'm happy to talk to y'all.
Thank you for being here. So what led to this combination of a master's degree in sports psychology and in early childhood development?
Well, early in my academic career, I started coaching when I was 16. So early in my academic career, I was pretty certain I was going to be a coach. I went and got that first master's so that it would help me with my on-field work with my athletes. My undergrad was in psychology. I primarily in teamwork dynamics, organizational behavior. And so I thought, oh man, this is an area that a lot of times at that time in the 90s, we weren't really doing a lot with the head part of the game for athletes. So I thought this would be a great combination. And then after I was married and had a family, I still wasn't coaching full time. And my wife said, you should go back and get a teaching degree because you love children. You love the education process. You're into teaching methodologies, because I was always talking about the methodologies used in the classroom versus the field. And so when I went back, I got the early childhood development one because I really wanted to know how the brains and how the learning process worked for the very young athletes I was working with.
So what age groups do you work with coaching then?
All over the board. I've worked with this, all the way up to the Olympic level, what we would consider, 20, 25, the elite athletes. Although, as we know, the brain's not fully developed until the mid 20s. So they're still quote unquote children. They're still growing and developing and require that kind of intentionality with the coaching. And I've worked all the way down to 2-year-olds. Wow. I was with Soccer Shots for a few years and then consulted with the organization as a whole on their curriculum, and their age is 2 to 9. So we have to work with the really young ones.
Yeah. I love that you are able to when we think about coaching, sports coaching, we think about, or I tend to think about the physical actions that we're doing with our bodies. And like you said, there's so much more to it. The mind being such a necessary tool for any kind of achievement, including physical achievement and breaking physical barriers and boundaries, all starts in the mind. So how did your coaching change from the way that you had thought that you would do coaching when you did sports psychology? How did that change once you had all the experience and education in early childhood development?
So I should probably provide the context that I was a very heady athlete. I was always in my own head. I was always my worst critic. I was the type of athlete where something would go wrong in the first minute of the game, and in the 80th minute, I'm still upset about that small detail. And so going into sports psychology for me was, I knew that it was something I needed, and I became not obsessed, but I came really passionate about the brain-body connection. There has to be more there, that those choke points weren't coming from the physical capabilities. There was something stopping us in the brain. There was some choke point in our processes. And then layering in the early childhood development completely changed the way I coached. I already was very heady in my approach to working with my athletes. I understood that there was so much more than the skills that we were training. And I, at that point, had also figured out that there was more to the game than just the sport itself, that we were teaching them life skills and values beyond the game. So then when I took the early childhood development, I started to understand the development environment, the milieu in which we're working with these children, that it's not just about the physical skills and it's not just about the brain, but it's about social development. And it's about the functional movement patterns and the functional societal values that we're instilling in these kids at a very young age. So everything I did as a coach, I had to understand they're watching, they're listening, they're picking it up, they mirror the world around them. And when they're around somebody of influence, somebody they care about, a parent, a coach, somebody who has created this bond with them, this trust bond, they will mimic what we do. And so my coaching really became much more intentional about what words I was using around them, how I was behaving in front of them, because I knew they were picking up the behaviors as well. And then what I valued, the way I treated certain things, certain words, certain values, certain ways of doing things. I knew that if I put value on certain things, that they would pick that up as well. So I had to be it just made me much more intentional.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned life skills as something we work on with a coach as well, especially younger kids. And that's probably not what people usually think of with a coach either. So what are some of the life skills that you think that you do work on with kids while you're coaching them as well?
Vulnerability. I give them that safe space. So there's the safety to fail, the safety to ask questions, the safety to be themselves, and then that vulnerability to admit when they've made a mistake. So as a coach, I would play with the kids. I'd get out and I'd play the game as well. And the older I got, the more my body wanted to do things, or my brain wanted to do things, but my body said, "Nah, you're 40 now. That's not going to happen." And so when I would mess up, I would admit it. Oh, I messed up. Coach messed up, and then I would show them by doing it, model the pathway to success. Like, you mess up, you don't quit there. You don't get upset. You manage the situation. You try to solve it. So vulnerability was a big one. I wanted them to be able to ask for help. I wanted them to seek that feedback. Growth mindset, obviously Carol Dweck's concept of growth mindset. I really wanted children to understand that things weren't innate in them, that if they weren't fast now or they weren't skilled at something now, it didn't mean they couldn't be. It's just a yet situation. Let's see if we can't provide you the tools and resources, and I'll come alongside you and work with you and see if we can't develop that skill. So I started to teach them that concept. The other one would be fortitude, resilience, the idea that, mistakes are just mistakes, and that's what sport's about, and that we're going to make these mistakes in life. And so we need to understand that, for me, I'm a big on creating these independent problem solvers. I wanted the athletes to be the ones that when mistakes were happening or things weren't going well, that they were the ones trying to solve the problems. A lot of times in their life, throughout the day, especially for the young ones, everything's scripted. They're told where to go, what to do, what to study, what to eat, who to play with. All these things happen, and that's fine. But when they get with me, I wanted them to have a place where they could start to explore that independence. Like, can they solve a problem on themselves? Or by themselves. I'm not going to give them the answer right away. When they mess up, I might give them a second to try to work through it. And then again, because they understand vulnerability, they'll look to me for help. When they give me that look, when they ask for that help, I'll step in. But again, I may not give the answer. I may give a puzzle key. I may ask them more questions and be more Socratic. And so those are kind of the life skills that I was really trying to layer into these kids. The hope was that someday they would never need me or any other coach. They could do things on their own, and they would have that self-sufficiency and that vulnerability and that independent problem solving, and that ability to, know that they can, the growth mindset, to know that they can overcome these adversities, or if they can't overcome it, then they're going to steer course away from that adversity because it's a total block.
As a coach, you are in some ways the leader, but you are empowering each of the players on this team, or each of the athletes, to be a leader of this group. And what I think is really is inspiring about it is that by doing this intentionally, you're acknowledging to yourself that I'm not the one out there. Like, I'm not the one on the field having to make these split decisions. I'm not going to be there to say, go left, go right, right? Jump higher, do this. And so our role, or your role as the coach, isn't to say, this is how to do it. What you're acknowledging, I think, and utilizing intentionally, is that your role is to create in them that ability to do that, because they're the ones who are going to have to do it. So I just think it's beautiful, that brain-body connection, that you were able to kind of naturally have the self-awareness in yourself to say, oh, I'm having these choke points. I'm having these mental blocks that are blocking my body from being able to do the things that I want it to do and that I cognitively want it to do. You had a great example of that message to ourselves of I'm too old to do this. What are some of the other messages that that can create those choke points and those blocks for athletes?
There are parallel words. I talk about them a little bit in my book, Spartan Mindset. There are these parallel words that we use in certain situations that they're just, they set off a process of reactions within the brain. They set off neural pathways. And so words like can't, words like don't, that's one of my biggest ones is when we don't athletes all the time is when you're constantly telling people not to do things. One, you're shutting down the creativity of trying to solve things or trying to, everybody said you couldn't run the 4-minute mile. Then Roger Bannister breaks the barrier. And now everybody is doing it because we always believed we couldn't do it because people said you can't, it's not possible, don't do it. Somebody went and did it. So that's one is like you're shutting down their creativity, their ability to try to overcome or solve. But you're also with the word don't, we can't visualize don't, children especially. Like what is don't? You can visualize run. So you yell at a kid, don't run. They can see themselves running in their head. But what's don't? A circle with a line through them running? Like it doesn't. So they don't understand what that word is. Most of us, our brain can't actually filter it. If somebody's standing on a tee box and there's water to the right, fairway to the left, and they're getting ready to swing and they're hard slicer, so they know the ball's going to go right. And you say, don't hit it in the water. Their brain hears, okay, hit it in the water. And it goes. So that was a big word that I always tried to eliminate was the don't. Like I did instead of saying don't, give them something they can do. Instead of don't run, walk. You can walk with the kids at soccer shots because they're so little, they want to grab the ball with their hands. So instead of saying no hands or don't hands, which means they'll want to use them because you've just told them, we would say, use your feet, show us your feet. Can you do it with your feet? And so that was one of the big things that we did with our athletes that don't, can't. Another one with our kids was a lot of times, like I said earlier, we're constantly giving the answers versus asking them what they see or what they want. And it's that, Jane Nelson, my mentor from Positive Discipline, used to always say, or still says it, that education, the root word is educare, to draw forth. So that was the big thing with me, was using language or using questioning or using a coaching style that was drawing out of them, like you were saying earlier, that ability to solve problems versus always just giving the answers.
What I know you've mentioned, obviously, with like little kids, you've worked with them a lot, especially 2-year-olds. It's probably a lot different than coaching the 25-year-olds that you might coach. Can you talk about some of the differences with the different age groups that you work with?
Yes. So what's interesting is the biggest difference is language. It's really in the delivery. So I might teach a similar skill to a 25-year-old that I'm teaching to a 4-year-old. It's going to be more advanced with the 25-year-old. It's going to be faster. It's going to be in a smaller time area. There are constraints that are added as the game gets more difficult, but it's my language. How am I teaching it to a 25-year-old versus how am I teaching it to a 4-year-old? A 25-year-old, they're very technical. They're very tactical. Their brains are developed much further along and they have a wider vocabulary. So I can be very technical in the way I teach it. I can talk about body position and, proprioception and angle of attack and velocity and things like that. With a 4-year-old, I need to use their language. And that was one of the big things that we always talked about at soccer shots was getting down to eye level with them, using a voice that's their tone, because I'm a big guy. So if I'm standing over the top of these children and I'm all excited, that may just feel like screaming to them. But if I get at eye level and make sure that we make eye contact, I'm creating that symmetry, that brain connection between us. And then I'm going to use language that they understand. We used to, with the little ones, we would talk about, ice cream scoops when we were trying to get them to scoop their foot under the ball and pop it up a little bit, scoop the ice cream. So you're always finding these analogies that fit them. In skiing, it's French fry pizza for go fast, stop. And that's how they should shape their skis. And so the biggest difference between the two, when it boils down to it, where we want to eliminate those choke points or eliminate those learning barriers, is to make sure that we've altered our language and our delivery to the audience that's in front of us.
There's so much rapport building that you're intentionally doing. You're using those skills that we use very often in counseling as the basis of that relationship, because that's what coaching is. It is relationship building, and that's what counseling is. It is relationship building and modeling and understanding where that athlete or that client is and being able to adapt our approach to them instead of trying to have them adapt to how we coach or how we do counseling. So it's a beautiful marriage of these different skills that you're bringing into coaching that honestly is appears very preventative in terms of some of the unintentional harm that can sometimes happen in sports and in coaching, and not, aside from physical injury, but emotional damage or emotional challenges that can be unintentionally created in sports. I think back to when I was a child, and sports were always like terrifying to me. I was horrible at anything sports related. I remember my second grade gym teacher, we had to run for like the presidential fitness thing. And so we had to run, and she would time us with a timer. And when I got to the end of the gym and I crossed the finish line, and I was feeling pretty good about myself because I couldn't run, but I was feeling like, okay, there's the finish line, right? And she, instead of saying the time that it was, she just said, "You don't want to know." And I was 7, and so we're 31 years later, and I always remembered that. And so when I last year I ran a marathon, and I was like, that's for her. That's for you, right? There was this like healing process that had to happen in me because there was so much shame involved in being slower than the other kids. There was so much shame involved in not being good at sports and feeling like you were letting other people down on your team, and so all of these things that I don't think that coach intended, but she also wasn't being intentional about not creating those situations. She wasn't being intentional about saying, I'm going to do this instead. And so I just think that what you're doing is so beautiful, because if we can be intentional and do these things instead, right? Be aware of our language, be aware of what messages that we're sending to young people when they're tackling these things. It can have such a profound impact on how they identify for themselves, the amount of competence that they feel that they have, the amount of am I a person? There's a lot of identity tied up in those experiences of, am I a person who can get better at things if I try? Or am I a person who's just not good at these things? So why bother trying, right? And I feel like what you're doing is just being so intentional about bringing those things in. So not only mitigating potential damage, but also using the sports to build those things up in these children. So I just think it's beautiful. So your book is coming out, The Spartan Mindset. And so who is this book for? Is it for parents of children? Is it for other coaches? Who is this book intended for?
So I originally wrote the book in a voice that was geared towards other coaches like me, or other people who were really interested in being a little bit more intentional and building those relationships. And, the basis is that the Frederick Douglass, it's better to build strong children than to repair broken adults. And so it was like, if we can, as coaches, become more intentional with our language and pour into these kids, then we can build out these Spartan mindsets, this infallible, indomitable spirit that overcomes adversity or adapts to adversity or innovates around it. But as I got further in the book and started talking to my mentor, Jane, and other people, I said, the message, what we're talking about, goes beyond sports. It goes further. So the book really is about anybody that either leads others or is themselves in these high performance, high stress situations when language really does become the mitigating factor. It's the key. That, when you're in a pressurized situation, the difference between first and last might be the language we're using. The difference between making the sale and not making the sale might be the language we're using. The difference between hitting that note and not hitting that note. And so you can see it apply across. And that's what it is each chapter is broken into either a word or phrase that's either a peril word or a power word. So it either helps our performance or it harms our performance. And there's also these transformational words that are those words that transform the people and the moment when they're used. And the chapters are all about telling stories that have to do with when the word's been used in the past, or when you can see it in real life, the effects that it's having on the brain and body and why it matters so much, some of the processes that are happening. And then, of course, hints and tips. So anybody that's in these situations, or I've had my one friend who is a coach read it and said, this is great. I'm more intentional in my daily speech with my athletes, but I've even noticed it with my kids. Like I've become a more intentional parent in shifting their language and helping them capture the right kind of language in stressful situations.
Yeah, it sounds like it could be even for people who aren't even interested in sports at all, really, just like you said, talking to their kids. Can you give some, I know you gave the example of don't as one of the words like we shouldn't use. Can you give an example of one of those power words? Is that what you call them? The words we should be using instead?
Yes. And one of my favorite is yet. And it's obviously Carol Dweck talked about it. She, when somebody can create an entire TED talk about a single word, it's a word with power. And she did a TED talk on the power of yet. And she talked about the fact that we typically throw up the can't barrier. Oh, I can't do that. I'm not good at math. I'm not capable of this. I wasn't born this way. And we use that fixed mindset to sort of shut down the opportunity at trying to achieve something new or different, getting out of our comfort zone. And so yet is such a powerful word because it gets people to move towards, from a vague or a non-existent future, move towards this future potential. Yet, like I can't do this now, but I can't yet. And so it gets them to start to visualize what it would look like if they could accomplish that, if they could overcome that. And then, of course, the real power behind yet, and I talk about it in the chapter, is layering in there the support. So when somebody says they can't do something, you teach them how to find the tools and resources to solve it. And that's such a powerful thing, especially for young athletes, to learn to find those tools and resources themselves. It's what we do in school. When we start assigning papers and we tell them where to go, go to the library, find the information. We're teaching them to start to find their own tools and resources. And so yet is when an athlete says, oh, I can't do something yet, but I'm going to give you the tools and resources. I'm going to come alongside you. We're going to work together at this. And what would it feel like when you can do it? Like, how amazing will it be when you can accomplish this? And I was working with soccer shots, and I had a young girl who all the kids we were working on juggling, and it was more for getting them comfortable with the ball hitting certain parts of their body. And so we're doing feet and we were doing shoulders and we were doing thighs, and she was trying to juggle on her thighs and she couldn't. And by the time I get to her, she's almost in tears. I can see it from across the field. So I start working my way. So I'm working through all the kids as they're juggling, and I'm working my way to her. By the time I get to her, she's almost in tears and she goes, I can't do it. And I pulled a Carol Dweck and said, yet. Can't do it yet, but that's okay. But the other kids, but this is your journey. It's not about them. It's about you. You shouldn't compare yourself to them. You should be comparing yourself to who you were yesterday or who you will be tomorrow. So I'm going to work with you. And so I did. And to be honest, it always blows certain people's minds. You talk to kids that way? Yeah, I talk to kids. That's exactly how I spoke to her. Like, they can, if I felt like she didn't understand what I was saying, I wouldn't say it that way, but that's exactly how we stood there and talked. And then I walked her through. Let me give you the tools and resources. I'm going to show you some tricks for how you can get it. So we talked about the ladder, bounce, catch, bounce, and we did it. So long story short, she gets a second one. She drops it, it hits her thigh, and then it hits her knee. And she's like, I did too, coach. I did too. That's more than I did earlier. And I said, exactly. And I said, so here's my challenge to you. And I showed her a couple other tricks. And I said, I want you to go home over the weekend. When you come back next week, I want you to tell me how many you're able to juggle, but I want you to train on your own and try it on your own and solve it. See how you can come up with ways that you can get the ball to stay bouncing on your thigh. And so I forgot about it. Busy life, things going on, but again, that's coaching. We don't know what sticks with them, and we don't know what they will remember. And that's the key. And so I forgot about it, and I'm at practice the next time, and she comes tearing across the field, running at me, gets out of the car and comes run. Coach, 5, 5, 5. She gets to me and goes, I juggled 5 times. And I go, huh? Oh, wow, that's so awesome. Look what you did. That's the power of yet right there. But again, it's not an empty promise. We have to back it up.
Yeah. And I think that example is very powerful also in the fact that you were able to forget about that instance. You weren't taking ownership of how many she could juggle. You were giving that same language, that same approach to each of the children at wherever they were in that process. And then it's up to them to go and do that. And so if you were taking ownership of that, you would have been thinking over the weekend, oh, I hope she gets it right. I hope she gets at least more than 2. I hope she, right. And if you were taking that on as her coach, then it robs her of that being her achievement and her accomplishment. And so I think that story, it not only models that the power of yet and that growth mindset thinking, but it also very well role models the way that you are approaching the coaching with these young people, being able to say that is I'm going to give them tools, or I am a tool to help process things, but those are their achievements. And I'm not going to think about that over the weekend and go, oh, I hope with my mind control, right? If I think about her hard enough, maybe she'll be able to balance 3, right? And because if you were doing that, that is a great way to burn yourself out and to have a lot of those stresses on you. So I love the fact that you said, I forgot about it, because when you put these habits in place of, when I see a child or a young person struggling, I'm going to do these things. I am going to do these things. I'm going to say these things. And then the outcome, I'm responsible for doing those things, but I'm not responsible for the outcome of those things. That's their victory to have. And so I just think that is a great demonstration of that as well.
Well said. That's actually one of the words is giving them that power. That's one of the words in the book as well. It's well said, because that's, you were talking earlier, the environment we're trying to create is this: they need to be intrinsically motivated. Like, you get the best results when there's intrinsic motivation, but more importantly, also, they need to feel a locus of control. It needs to be internal. And so using the word you and allowing them to have the victory and stepping back and saying, you should be so proud of yourself, and not taking the glory away. And when mistakes are made, instead of saying, you failed me, we lost because of you, saying, I didn't prepare you well enough, or we'll go back to the drawing board and we will solve this together. Using that kind of language, like you just said, gives power to them. And imagine how much better people perform when they feel like they have control. And imagine how much healthier mentally they are when they feel like they have control.
Yes, absolutely. And you mentioned visualizing a couple of times when it comes to the language. And I love the example of, I can't visualize not hitting the ball into the water, but I can visualize hitting the ball into the field. I think that's such a great example. And it makes me think about the example of, if I tell you to picture walking into a grocery store, picking up a lemon, think about all the different, what color is it? How does it feel? Cut the lemon open in your mind and take a bite out of that lemon. For me, even just now, right? My mouth started to prepare to break down the juices of a lemon. So our bodies respond to the things that we are thinking about, and our thoughts respond to the things that we are hearing and experiencing in the world. And then we put our own interpretation on those. And so I think that even just that allows us to see what an important connection this is between our bodies and our brains, and what we're experiencing from our leadership, from our coaches, and from our teammates. Because even just that has that physical response, that physical reaction. And I can't bully my body into running faster. Like I just can't do it. But I can picture myself doing those things when somebody else that is helping me or supporting me gives me permission to picture myself doing those things. If my coach says, no, you're not running that fast yet, I now can picture myself running that fast. I can hear music and picture my feet hitting in that pattern that's going to get me the pace I want. And when I was marathon training, I would listen to to pace music, and when I went to sleep, and I just picture my feet hitting the pavement in the beat with that, because I was giving myself permission. And I think that's what you're doing with these young people, is you're doing permission giving. You're giving them permission to visualize those successes for themselves.
Definitely love it. That was my first master's in sports psych. Was imagery was my thesis. And so again, the obsession with the brain body connection, you nailed it. Like that was, I was just watching a US Olympic snowboarder discuss how he does imagery right before a race. And he was talking about the smells and feeling the snow on his face and the wind coming in the edges of his goggles. And yeah, I'm with you. And it does, it opens up so many neural pathways to start to imagine that.
So your book comes out this coming week, then on the 18th. So where can people find it and where can they get more information on your book?
You can find it at all your favorite retailers. So wherever you love to buy your books, they have it. Barnes and Noble, Booktopia, Bookshop, Waterstones in the UK, and then or Target, Amazon, all of those places. It's in ebook or Kindle format, and it's in paperback format. And the easiest way to find me is to go to coachreed.com. And there's actually a link there for pre-order on the book.
Awesome.
I know you've worked with a lot of teams. So do you primarily in your coaching, are you offering coaching to teams or are you offering individual coaching as well?
I've done individual coaching. I typically end up working with the sports that are more team oriented. So that's why it's usually team. But I have done the individual coaching. And the caveat to any coaches out there is that even when you're working with a team, you're doing individual coaching, because each athlete needs to be coached differently. Each athlete needs to be treated as their own person and needs to be approached in the unique way that they need for their own learning experience. And like you said earlier, it's not how I teach, it's how they learn. And I need to adapt to that. So I have worked with individual athletes. Typically it's the parents coming to me because we've seen what coaching can be. We've seen sometimes it's, you don't know what you don't know and you make mistakes, or it's I'm an old school coach and I coach like the coach from Varsity Blues. And you're like, that's not really what coaching is, but okay. And so sometimes you get these kids at a very young age that they're timid, they're fearful, they are already struggling with some mental health issues or whatever it is. And a parent will show up at my camps. I used to have them all the time, and they'd say, so-and-so's really struggling. Can you work with her a little bit extra in the next week just to get her mind right, just to get her back on track? And so the individual coaching really comes in all the stuff we've talked about, where I'm building that relationship. I'm shifting the locus of control. I'm empowering them to be more independent. And again, I'm also layering in very positive language so that we build them back up.
Beautiful. It sounds very much like the difference between individual counseling or therapy and family counseling and therapy, because when you're working with a family, just like when you're working with a team, if there are 5 people in that family, there's a relationship between every single combination of people. And on a golf team or a soccer team, there's a relationship between every individual player on that team. That's a lot of relationships to be navigating and working with and adapting the way that we coach to those different kinds of relationships and dynamics. And I would imagine with sports coaching, there's not only the relational the personal relationships that there would be in family therapy, but there's also the professional relationships that are happening, right? Like I'm this position and you're this position, so we need to have that working professional relationship, as well as the relationship that we have as people off of the field, I would imagine does come into the games and the playing as well. So it's very, very it's really cool to see this, because I think that especially in team sports, I mean, I grew up doing precision figure skating. So my parents knew I was not going to be a soccer player. I could not run, but I could skate. So precision figure skating, it was like you had 2 different relationships with the same person, because I might not trust that person isn't going to say mean things about me on the bus, but I trust that when I reach out my hand for that program, that person's going to be there. And when I, dip down or do a flip or something, that person's going to catch me. And that's a totally different relationship than trusting them in terms of our social interaction. And vice versa. There were people where I was like, that's my best friend. I love that person. I talk to that person all the time. But when we were doing programs, I was a little bit more tense. Like I would feel my arm tense up, or I would move my hand to go, where is she? Where's her hand? Where is she? Right. Versus the people where you just put your hand out because you know their hand is right there.
Yeah, you nailed it. And then I had a friend that was in precision skating, and it is a very mental game. There's a lot of team building, relationship building, and mental fortitude off the ice before you ever get on the ice, because you're relying on these other people to not only complete the tasks, but to secure your safety in certain situations.
Yeah. And so you mentioned on your form as well that you've been advocating for mental wellness in youth sports for decades. Can you kind of talk about how you see counseling important to athletes that you work with as well?
Yes. So one caveat to what I was saying earlier, an amendment to what I was saying earlier, is I know my limits and I know where my training is and my abilities. And so that's one of the things that I always want my athletes to understand, is that they should know their limits and they should know that they can break those limits. But for me, I'm not a counselor. So I would happily work with people's children to build them up, to help right the ship. But if I saw signs that I thought, oh, this child really does need to see an expert, I'm not going to start delving into the mind in that realm, because that's not my skill set. I would usually go to the parents and say, you might want to have him or her talk to somebody. You might want to seek out. And so that was one way that I was always looking at, was if I thought I had athletes that were beyond my help as a coach in my training, I would try to pass them on to a counselor. I would try to get them the help they need. The other piece was advocating with other coaches about the mental health of our athletes, explaining to coaches that I can get the same results that you got without ever having to demean a child or scream at a child or belittle somebody or compare them to their teammates. So now that you've created this dynamic. And the reason I would tell those coaches is because I can make your lives easier. If you're building that intrinsic motivation and shifting the locus of control to them, and you're empowering them to be independent thinkers, then you are stoking fires in them that they will compete harder and they will learn better in those environments. Remove the yelling and it deactivates the amygdala and allows the frontal lobe to start working again, which means that actually they can learn. So that was always my favorite, when a coach would scream, "What the heck are you thinking?" And I'd kindly let them know they're probably not thinking, because you're screaming at them. The amygdala is activated. They're trying to decide if they run, if they freeze, or if they fight you. I mean, that's really what's going on in these kids' brains. And so that was the other thing with the advocacy, was really put back on the coaches of, you don't know what you don't know. Let's share some things that will go help you. And so that we can shift the way we're creating these environments, because you brought it up earlier. It's when you're constantly being inundated with negative messages from a person you trust, or when you're in this situation where you are a couple days a week and a couple hours on the weekend being exposed to language that is damaging. Robert Waldman did the research and showed that through functional MRI, the difference between what physical chronic abuse does to the brain and mental chronic abuse or verbal chronic abuse is the same. There's no difference. So the brain damage is there, the causes, that are there. And so that was the one thing, was always explaining to coaches that the environment we create actually can impact the brains and the growth and development of our children, the emotional well-being. So the advocacy really fell on going out to sports organizations and going to major conferences and going to organizations and saying, let's just shift the coaching environment a little bit. Let's just change the way we're interacting with the kids, because then we're empowering them. And yes, that may be your weakest player, quote unquote, but that's a human being that will go do something beyond the game. What skills and tools are we giving them to survive in life? And, it's always you never want to be a kid's last coach. You never want to be the reason a kid quit a sport. You don't want to be the person that the kid looks back on years later and is running a marathon saying, this is, I did it. I had coaches that said things that those are the words that still stick out. And so that's really the heavy advocacy, was in shifting the way we interacted with children, shifting the way we coach. And Jane Nelson and I got together and we created these tool cards called Positive Discipline Tools for Coaches. And each card is a concept. And the concepts are based on Adlerian psychology and Adolf Reicher's and that sort of positivism and self-actualization. But the cards are basically a blueprint for how coaches can build relationships and interact with players positively, and even quote unquote discipline them, even learn how to create an environment where when children are acting up, we understand that they're not acting up because they're bad, because they chose to do this. They're acting up because they're misunderstood. They don't know how to share their feelings. They don't know how to interact in that moment. And so the cards teach coaches to change the way we interact from a quote unquote punishment perspective as well.
Absolutely. That's awesome. So it's positive discipline cards for coaches.
Positive discipline tools for coaches. Yeah. And
Tools for coaches.
there's a link on my website. People will see it if they're that interested. Jane's been doing this 40 some years. And she's been in every realm, Montessori, education, family, work. And so when we got together to do the sports one, it was such a thrill to work with her because she is like, being around her is so uplifting that you can understand why her style works so well. She's such an amazing human being.
Wonderful. Very cool. That's exciting to get to know about as well. So I like the modeling that you're doing about referring to coaching or referring to counseling, because you're saying there are boundaries that that we put on ourselves that we want to stretch and expand and have permission to lift from ourselves, right? Those limiting boundaries. There are also these other boundaries that we do in order to say yes to the things that we're saying yes to. So if I'm your coach, I can't be your counselor, because if I'm your counselor, I can't be your good coach. And so, there are these boundaries that we set for ourselves, and that you're setting as well. That is an intentional boundary where you're saying, this is a counseling situation, and I can help with your coaching, and I can help with your mindset about the things that we're doing. But for these other things, a counselor is going to be a best fit, so that I can fully focus on being your coach. I have no doubt that, you said you're not a counselor, and in my head I said, you're not a counselor yet, but I could see you getting that third master's.
It's strongly thinking though.
I mean, I could totally see it, and so I think when you're doing these things, you're expanding into, okay, I'm taking a more holistic approach to my coaching young people, and I'm not just focusing on what they're physically doing in the sport, but I'm also taking these other approaches. I think those boundaries could get wiggly, and so I love that you're modeling this for other coaches too, that nope, that boundary is there because I want to be able to fully be their coach and do these things with them. So I just think that is really, really beautiful. And I think I love that you do these tools for coaches too, because I would imagine there's maybe some resistance with that. There's difficulty sometimes for coaches to change that mindset, or to coach in a different way than they were coached. So I just think it's beautiful that you're highlighting, like, no, this is going to make your team stronger. This is going to make your team better at growing themselves, not only within the sport, but as human beings that are going to be the future, for the human race. And being able to highlight those benefits of using these tools, I think is a really, really great way to preemptively diffuse some of that resistance that I think would naturally be there.
Oh, and it's there too.
Oh,
I mean, we fall into habits and we think we've got a good rhythm of how things work. And so you're right. It was always just, I never tried to tell them they were doing anything wrong. It was more like, hey, here's a way that we can do it even better. Like, you can be, and you don't even have to give me credit. Don't tell anybody you're using the tool cards. I don't care, but this might actually help your athletes perform even better.
Awesome. So if you could give a suggestion to somebody on the fence about starting counseling, what might that suggestion be?
Do it. And the reason why is because we internalize everything, and we will take all of our feelings and all of our thoughts and all of our beliefs, and we will stuff them back in, and they rattle around in our head in this very mean, sometimes very mean, very abrasive voice that's constantly there, and we can't get that voice to go away. It's constantly, I have it, imposter syndrome every day, like, oh, are you really good at this? Are you? And not only that, but those are bathing our brain in chemicals like that, stuffing our feelings down. We no longer are standing on the shore watching our feelings going by and acknowledging them and naming them. We dove into the river, and it's overflowing, and it's taking us downstream. And so for me, that's why don't try to go the road your own, because your brain you can't do that. You can't be two different things at once. You need somebody else to share these feelings with. You need somebody else to pour these out to, somebody who can listen, somebody who can help you process, and somebody who can help you reframe and rewire those, or else you're just going to end up drowning in your own emotions inside your own head.
Absolutely. Love that. And, you spoke before about, that you'll withhold is the wrong word, but you'll stop yourself from providing answers to the people that you're coaching until they give you that signal that they're asking for help. And what I love about that is that you're not withholding the help, you're letting them lead the help. And with the counseling field and with coaching of any kind, that asking for help piece is such an important skill that you're fostering in the young people that you coach. But that is a difficult skill to build up. And so I love that you are identifying that and helping people to ask for help. And it's so important to accept the help that's offered around us because, I want to have a counselor for keeping my mental health healthy. But I also want to have a coach for my soccer playing, right? Or for my team. And I want to have an accountant to do my taxes and handle all of that stuff. And I want an attorney who knows the law way better than I do, right? And so just having this team of people around us and being able to build that skill of asking for help and then accepting the help of those all of those different supports around us, I think is just so beautiful. So I loved that you would share that previously too.
Here's what's really cool. So the New Zealand All Blacks are considered, they're New Zealand's national rugby team, and they're considered the greatest sports team of all time because their winning record over the last 120 years or whatever is up in the 90% range. People have changed, everything like that, but they've got this culture of winning. What's amazing is these are some big 250-pound people. They're some big, strong, tough human beings. They instituted a new concept at their organization where they brought in therapists, not sports psychologists, not performance experts, therapists. And when one of the All Blacks is having a day where he needs to speak to somebody, he just needs to go up to somebody on the staff and say, I'm having a day, I could use some help. If the greatest sports team on the planet and some of the most fierce physical competitors on the planet can admit when they need help, then why aren't we doing it with our 10-year-olds? Why aren't we doing it on our own? Help is such a big word. It's actually one of the words in the book. It's one of the transformational words. Being able to know that you have the safety and environment where you can actually stop and say, I'm having a day, I need to speak to somebody. Huge. And as a coach, you'd want to be that person that they would trust to come to so that you can help them get the help they need.
Mm-hmm. Wonderful. Wonderful. What a powerful message.
I'm Coach Reed Maltbie, and I need a counselor.
Awesome. Me too. So does Chrissa. Speaking of asking for help, when we say I need a counselor, we open up that vulnerability that you model and that you facilitate. And it's just a beautiful thing. So this has been wonderful having you here, Coach Reed. We've really, really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's such great information. And you can find Coach Reed at coachreed.com, Coach REED.com. You can find the Spartan Mindset book anywhere where books are sold or at fullspartan.com. And on coachreed.com, you can find those positive discipline tools for coaches, which I think is a great tool. And I love that you're giving permission to use that as a secret weapon in your pocket and make it seem like those are our ideas as the coach. Wonderful. So thank you so much for being here. This has been really, really great.
Thank you. It's been a joy talking to you all.
Okay, wonderful. So I'm Chrissa Hunt.
And I'm Julie Johnson, and we need a counselor.
And so do you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the You Need a Counselor podcast. We are so grateful that you are here. Now, we want to hear from you. Text us or give us a call at 515-650-3231. You can also find the You Need a Counselor podcast on Facebook and Instagram. If you've enjoyed today's show, please take a moment to like, review, and comment, as all of these things help others to find and benefit from this podcast as well. If you're in the state of Iowa and interested in mental health counseling or behavioral health intervention services, give us a call at 1-800-531-4236. And if you're a provider seeking play therapy CEUs, you can find us at patreon.com/youneedatraining. We'll see you for the next episode, Sunday at 5.